My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening in early November, and I knew from the first second of silence before she spoke that something was coming. That particular kind of silence. I'd learned it over 63 years of living, the last 22 of them as a father. It's the silence of someone who has already rehearsed what they're about to say. "Dad," she said, "about Thanksgiving." I was standing in my kitchen in Guelph, stirring a pot of split pea soup I'd been making every November since my wife passed. The kind of soup that takes 3 hours and fills the whole house with something that almost feels like company. "What about it?" I said. Another pause. Shorter this time. She'd gotten past the hardest part. Trevor's parents are flying in from Vancouver. Both of them. And you know how it is. His mom, it's a lot of people already, and the house isn't big enough for everyone to be comfortable. And Trevor thinks it would be better if... She stopped. Started again. "We think it would be better if this year, just this year, you maybe did your own thing." I kept stirring the soup. I don't know why that detail stays with me. The wooden spoon going in slow circles. The steam rising up. I just kept moving it. "My own thing," I said. "Just for this year, Dad. We'll do something in December, just us. I promise." I told her I understood. I told her not to worry. I told her to enjoy her Thanksgiving and to tell the kids I loved them. We hung up, and I turned the burner down to low, and I stood there in that kitchen for a long time without moving. Let me back up, because context matters. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter the way I've always thought of her, because that's what she is, full stop. She married Trevor 6 years ago. He's not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He works hard, he loves her, he's good to my grandchildren. But he and I have never been easy with each other. He's the kind of man who fills every room he's in with his own certainty, and I'm the kind of man who tends to go quiet when that happens. We've always been polite. We've never been close. After my wife Carol passed 4 years ago now, I moved from our old house in Kitchener into a smaller place in Guelph, closer to my daughter. That was the idea anyway. Close enough to be part of things. Close enough to see my grandchildren, a boy of 9 named Finn and a girl of 6 named Iris, on a regular basis. And for a while, it worked like that. Sunday dinners. School pickups when my daughter had a long shift at the hospital. Birthday parties where I'd drive 40 minutes each way and come home smelling like cake frosting and feeling like maybe things were going to be all right after all. But after Trevor's promotion 2 years ago, things shifted. He traveled more. When he was home, his time was more carefully organized. Dinners became shorter, less frequent. My daughter started calling to reschedule things more often than she used to. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. That's my way. I notice things and I carry them quietly and I tell myself it's just a season, it'll pass. Thanksgiving, though, that one landed differently. Carol and I had made Thanksgiving our thing. Not Christmas. Christmas always meant driving to her parents in Owen Sound, traditions locked in stone. But Thanksgiving was ours. We'd started it the year my daughter was born. Just the 3 of us in our first apartment, a lopsided turkey and a pie Carol had burned on the bottom but refused to throw out. Over the years it grew. Friends came, her cousins came, the table got longer. But the core of it, the reason for it, was always the same. Family. Our family. The one we'd built. After Carol died, my daughter kept the tradition going. She hosted it at her place. I came early to help in the kitchen the way Carol used to. We'd make her mother's cranberry sauce together, the one with orange zest and a splash of bourbon. And we didn't talk about Carol directly, but we felt her there in the recipe, in the smell of it, in the way my daughter would sometimes pause over the pot with this look on her face. Last year, Trevor's brother had visited from Calgary for Thanksgiving and sat at the head of my daughter's table and made a speech about the family he was grateful for. A speech that didn't mention me once. I'd noticed that too, so I had Thanksgiving alone. My neighbor Harold, a retired mail carrier with a bad hip and an excellent vegetable garden, had invited me to his place, but I'd said no. I don't know why exactly. Pride, maybe. Or something more complicated than pride. I think part of me needed to sit in the specific loneliness of that day and understand it clearly, rather than paper over it with borrowed company. I made my soup. I watched the Grey Cup highlights from the year before, because There was nothing else on I cared about. I called my sister in Halifax, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. Her garden, her cat, a mystery novel she was reading, and she didn't ask me how I was spending the day, and I didn't tell her. At some point in the early afternoon, I put on my coat and went for a walk. There's a park near my house along the Speed River. The trees were still holding on to some of their color, that last fierce orange and yellow before everything lets go. I walked for a long time, without any destination in mind, the way I used to walk when I was thinking through problems at work. I'd been a civil engineer for 31 years, mostly with the region of Waterloo. A lot of my best thinking happened on foot. That afternoon, I wasn't solving anything. I was just walking. I ended up near the community center, the big one on Speedvale. There was a sign out front. I'd driven past it a dozen times without reading it properly. Thanksgiving Community. Dinner. All welcome. 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. I stood at the edge of the parking lot and looked at it for a moment. Then I walked past it and kept going. I made it about another block before I stopped. I thought about Carol. I thought about the way she used to say that a table with room for one more always had room for 10 more if you rearranged right. I thought about my grandmother, who had come to Canada from Northern Ireland in 1952 with $40 and a suitcase, and had fed half her street every Christmas Eve for the rest of her life. Because she remembered what it felt like to have nothing. I turned around and went back. I want to be honest. I didn't go in there with any noble intention. I went in because I was 63 years old and I was spending Thanksgiving alone, and the alternative, going home to the soup I'd already made, felt like something I wasn't ready to face yet. The woman at the door, a heavy-set woman in a volunteer apron with a name tag that said June, looked at me and said, "You here to eat or to help?" And I said, "Which one do you need more?" She handed me an apron. I spent the next 4 hours in the kitchen. There were about 12 of us volunteering. A mix of people, college students and retirees, and a couple of families with teenagers who seemed genuinely happy to be there rather than just tolerating it. I was put on turkey carving, which I was good at, and then on dishwashing, which I was less good at, but didn't complain about. The dining room filled up steadily. Singles, mostly. Some elderly people brought in by their building's recreation program. A few families that were clearly going through something difficult. You could see it in the careful way they carried themselves. The gratitude that was too raw to be casual. A man about my age sat alone at the end of a long table and ate his entire meal without looking up from his plate, and something about the set of his shoulders, the practiced, dignified containment of it, made me have to look away. I knew that posture. I'd spent the morning wearing it myself. At some point, one of the organizers, a young man named Andrew, who seemed to be running everything with impressive calm, asked if anyone had a car and could do a late pickup for a woman who'd missed the shuttle from her senior's residence on Stone Road. I had a car. I said I'd go. Her name was Margaret, 81 years old, small as a bird, dressed like she was going somewhere important. I helped her down the front steps of her building, and she held my arm and told me she hadn't missed a Thanksgiving dinner in 40 years. Not even the year she had her hip replaced. I told them to reschedule the surgery, she said, completely seriously, and I laughed for the first time all day. I got her there. I sat with her while she ate, because she gestured to the chair across from her with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. She told me about her late husband, a geologist who had once spent 3 months in the Northwest Territories and come home thinner and more interesting. She told me about her son in Toronto and her daughter in Winnipeg and how she'd learned not to wait for them to call first. "You make your own occasions," she said. "You don't ask permission for your happiness." I drove her home after dinner. She shook my hand at the door and told me she'd see me next year. Not an invitation, a statement. I drove home along the river road. The sun was down. The streets were quiet the way they only get on holidays, that particular holiday emptiness that usually makes me feel the absence of things. That night it felt different. Not full, exactly, but not hollow either. Something in between. Something more sustainable. I got home at 8:30. I heated up the soup. I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought about my daughter. and I wasn't angry. That's the part I want to try to explain, because I think it's the most important part and the hardest to say right. I wasn't angry. I was sad, yes. I was sad in that deep, patient way that comes when something you love has slowly become something different. I missed the Thanksgivings we'd had. I missed Carol in the kitchen. I missed Finn on my lap asking me to explain football. I missed feeling like there was a place at the table that was specifically mine. But anger, the hot, righteous kind that had lived in me in the weeks before that day, it was gone. I don't fully know how to account for it. Maybe it was Margaret telling me she'd rescheduled her hip surgery for a community dinner. Maybe it was the man at the end of the table with the careful shoulders. Maybe it was just the plain work of doing something with your hands when your heart is too full to sit still. I went to bed at 10. I slept well, which surprised me. My phone rang at 7 the next morning, my daughter. I looked at the screen for a moment before answering. I noticed I wasn't bracing myself the way I had been lately before her calls. "Dad," she said, and her voice was different. There was something in it I hadn't heard in a long time. Something younger. "Good morning," I said. "Dad, I need to." She stopped. "Were you at the Thanksgiving dinner at the community center on Speedvale yesterday?" I was quiet for a moment. "I was, yes." Andrew posted a video, the organizer. He posted it last night on the community Facebook group, and Dad, it's been shared like 300 times. I had no idea what she was talking about. "What video?" "You with Margaret, you helping her down the steps of her building, and then sitting with her at dinner, and then driving her home. He filmed part of it, not the whole thing, just a bit, from across the room. And someone at the residence got a clip of you at the door. He put it together into this little, I don't know, a short thing, and he wrote about what Thanksgiving actually means, and people are just." She stopped again. I could hear that she was crying. My daughter cries the way Carol used to, quietly, like she's trying not to, like she thinks it's an imposition. "Dad," she said, "I didn't know you were alone." "I wasn't, in the end," I said. That made it worse, somehow. Her crying got less quiet. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry about what I said on the phone. I let Trevor manage the whole thing and I didn't. I should have just told him that you were coming, that there wasn't a question. It's your Thanksgiving too. It was always yours too." I sat with that for a moment. Not to punish her with the silence, just to let it be real for a second. "I know you know that," I said finally. "And I know this past while has been complicated. I'm not easy to schedule. I take up a certain kind of space, and I know that doesn't always fit. That's not—" "Let me finish." I said it gently, but I said it. "I'm not angry with you. I want you to hear that, because I mean it. But I need you to know that I'm not going to stop needing to be part of things. Not Christmas, not Thanksgiving, not the kids' school concerts. I'm not going to make demands about it. But I need you to know that the door doesn't close for me, not for Trevor's parents or anyone else. That door stays open. That's not negotiable." Silence on the line, but not the rehearsed kind, the real kind. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad, good," I said. "Now, is there any turkey left over?" She laughed. It was a wet, uneven laugh, the kind that comes out of crying, and it was the best sound I'd heard in months. I want to say something about the video, because people have asked me about it, and I think the truth is simpler than it sounds. I didn't know anyone was filming. I wasn't performing anything. I helped Margaret because she needed help, and because my grandmother would have been embarrassed on my behalf if I hadn't. That's the whole story. The response to it, the shares, the messages from strangers, a brief mention on the local Guelph Mercury Tribune site that my neighbor Harold texted me a screenshot of before 8 in the morning. All of that surprised me completely. People kept using the word heartwarming, and I don't disagree. But what struck me more was how many people wrote some version of, "I didn't know this was still happening. I didn't know people still did this." I found that sadder than anything else about that whole day. The surprise that ordinary decency could exist. The low expectations we've all quietly agreed to without admitting it. Margaret called me the following week. I don't know how she got my number. I suspect Andrew, who seemed like the kind of man who connects people, and she invited me to her building's weekly card game on Thursday afternoons. I went. I have been going most Thursdays since. I am consistently the youngest person at the table by 14 years, and I have lost more money in 5-cent increments than I care to calculate. Christmas that year was at my daughter's house. She called me in late November and said she'd spoken with Trevor, and they agreed that I was coming for Christmas Day, full stop. No conditions. She used those words, full stop. And I recognized them as words she'd heard from me over the years, and something about that made my chest feel tight in a good way. Trevor shook my hand when I arrived. It wasn't a warm handshake, but it was genuine. He looked me in the eye. That was new. After dinner, while the kids were occupied with their presents, and my daughter was on the phone with her cousin in Sudbury, Trevor sat down across from me at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of scotch. He set one in front of me without asking if I wanted it. I did want it. "I owe you an apology," he said. Not a preamble. Straight to it. I revised my opinion of him slightly upward. "You don't need to," I started. "I do," he said. Thanksgiving was my call. I told her it would be better, and she trusted me, and I was wrong. I was making it about logistics when it wasn't about logistics. I looked at my scotch. What was it about? He was quiet for a moment. "I think I've always found it hard the way she and you are. The way she looks at you. How much of her I can't." He stopped, reconsidered. "My own dad and I aren't close. We never have been. I think sometimes I don't know what to do with what you two have." I thought about that. I thought about it carefully. "That's not something to solve," I said. "That's just something to make room for." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. We drank our scotch, and through the doorway I could hear Finn explaining something elaborate and urgent to his sister. And the house was warm and full of the smell of the dinner we'd just had. And for a long time, neither of us felt the need to speak. I think about Margaret sometimes. I think about her saying, "You make your own occasions. You don't ask permission for your happiness." I think about the way she dressed to come to a community dinner, like she was going somewhere that mattered because to her she was. I'm 63. I have a bad knee and a good soup recipe and a kitchen that is quieter than I'd like. I have a daughter who loves me and a son-in-law who is learning to make room, and 2 grandchildren who will grow up with whatever shape our family becomes. I didn't get what I wanted that Thanksgiving. I got something I didn't know I needed, which was the chance to find out what I was made of when I had nothing else to lean on. Carol would have liked that dinner. She'd have been in the kitchen by noon, organizing everyone, and she'd have had Margaret laughing within 5 minutes. I know that as certainly as I know anything. I still make the soup every November. I make enough for 2.